Hello, my name is Charles Lauer, and I'm going to summarize and contrast the pro-capitalist and anti-capitalist theories of education. At the end, I will choose which theory I prefer. I'm going to start off with a quote, and this quote is from a Russian philosopher. A Russian philosopher named Solzhenitsyn said, "Amid all the vituperation, we forget that the defects of capitalism represent the basic flaws of human nature. Allowed unlimited freedom together with the various human rights, we also forget that under communism, which is breathing down the neck of all moderate forms of socialism, which are unstable, the identical flaws run riot in any person with the least degree of authority. While everyone else under the system does indeed attain equality, the equality of destitute slaves, that is." So Solzhenitsyn thinks both systems are pretty terrible, and I gotta say, I think I agree with him, at least in regards for education. So now for some clarity, I wanted to define what capitalism actually was, and I also wanted to define an anti-capitalism system, which I chose socialism. So what is capitalism? Capitalism is a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights in which all property is privately owned, and that's according to capitalism.org. I also wanted to state what socialism was, and socialism is a way of organizing a society in which major industries are owned and controlled by the government rather than by individual people and companies. And that was according to Merriam-Webster.com. So to start off now, I'm going to talk about the pro-capitalist forms of education. I feel strongly that a good education is something that is correlated to a good national economy. And America has a good national economy, hence a pretty respectable educational system. I like Friedman's idea of giving parents vouchers redeemable for a specified maximum sum per child per year, and then the parent could spend this on approved educational services. I like this plan because it ties in with Friedman's article from 2 months ago. Friedman went on to say that one way to coordinate successful economic activity is to have voluntary cooperation of individuals. I think the key word from this sentence is voluntary, because in this scenario, a parent seems to have a lot of voluntary freedom. An economy can remain successful when it has the tremendous school systems that America currently has to offer. Although the systems are not perfect, it is still better than the educational systems in a majority of other countries. Friedman says, "History suggests that capitalism is a necessary condition for political freedom. For example, in the 19th century, the Western world, there was also the Golden Age of Greece, and the Roman era also had this infrastructure." Coming from a history standpoint as a history teacher, I have to acknowledge that this is a pretty compelling argument. Friedman also said, "Capitalism is the best social arrangement available because its essence is markets." Friedman believes that markets are very successful when they are non-coercive, voluntary, and cooperative. Individual freedom is important for things to run smoothly, and markets that make choice available are important to people having individual freedoms. A market, just to clarify, is a non-coercive, cooperative social arrangement based on voluntary exchange, and it promotes individual freedom. Later on, Friedman says that pro-capitalist theories should be run privately through markets with public funding. For example, he suggests charter schools. I actually disagree with pro-capitalist theory of education and the idea of charter schools. I disagree with charter schools because I think that the involvement of money will lead to widespread corruption, and I just think the money getting involved with the schools is going to just lead to a huge mess of problems. An example of this was one that Professor Backer brought into class, and he mentioned how Governor John Kasich, his presidential campaign may have been partially funded through these charter schools, and some of the money may have been going to him when it should have been going to other places. This case is still in trial, and no one's sure how how much truth there is to the whole story. But I think it kind of just epitomizes the whole issue with charter schools, and when money gets involved, it kind of just adds up to a lot of corruption and people trying to be greedy and get their hands on the money. So now I'm going to talk about the anti-capitalist theories of education. For the most part, I tend to agree with Althusser when he says schools reproduce ideology and skills to keep capitalism functioning. And I also like how Bowles said that schools prepare students for the coercive and non-cooperative system of capitalism, and we should work to change the system rather than the schools. So Bowles is basically saying that the whole system in general is the problem. We shouldn't just pinpoint and blame the schools for everything. The one issue I had with Bowles' quote, which I'll read again, it was, schools prepare students for the coercive and non-cooperative system of capitalism. I think that he's right, and I think that eventually this problem will be fixed, but I think he could have done a better job of giving some short-term solutions, particularly for someone who's going into the educational field. I would have appreciated that. And then additionally, something I liked about Bowles that he talked about was, like, why should we even want to reform education in the first place? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with America's capitalistic education system? I'm going to start out by pointing out a line that Bowles said, which reads, liberal strategies for achieving economic equality have been based on a misconception of the educational system. So he's basically saying a lot of the public in America doesn't fully understand the educational system in America. And he goes on to say, the probability of a high school graduate attending college is extremely dependent on parental socio-economic status. And I feel like that's something that the American public kind of underestimates. Secondly, he states, the dollar payoff to increased education, while strongly dependent on race and sex, is related to IQ only tenuously. So basically all he's saying is that IQ isn't even that important when it comes to increasing your amount of education. Instead, he says that evidence indicates that the pattern of social relationships fostered in schools is hardly irrational or accidental. So if this is true, the consequences are startling for me to contemplate, and I'd like to do more research on that area, definitely. So later, Bowles says, schools foster types of personal development compatible with the relationships of dominance and subordinacy in the economic sphere. I think there should be more of an emphasis on the intrinsic benefits of learning. I think that currently there's too much of a focus on the extrinsic benefits of learning, such as a focus on grades. Towards the end of the chapter, Bowles says, the way in which high schools are currently set up is in the same manner as white-collar work, and he calls it a hierarchical system. Bowles thinks that it's a bad thing, according to this chapter at least, that education plays a major role in the hiding or the justifying of the exploitative nature of the U.S. economy. So I don't know if it's justifying, but I can definitely see his point in education hiding the exploitative natures of the U.S. economy. Because I think in high schools we don't really talk about the exploitative nature of the U.S. economy enough. I don't think that everything's wrong about the economy in a capitalism system, but it seems unfortunate that our students are not better educated on the area, and I just feel, as a social studies teacher, I wish they had us implement this more in our lesson plans. If I had to choose between the anti-capitalism or capitalism system, I guess I would choose anti-capitalism, because in my eyes it's the lesser of the two evils. But maybe I only think this because I'm coming from America and all I've seen is the anti-capitalism system, so I kind of know the flaws of the system a little bit better. But if I were from Russia or somewhere where there weren't as much capitalism and good education around, I probably would have a completely different answer to this question. So in conclusion, I wanted to add something from Cleaver, and Cleaver states that there's a hierarchy in the divisions of the class in America because the higher waged are used to mediate the relation between capital and the lower waged. This hierarchy is seen throughout society, and there's a constant struggle that exists because of it. This seems to be pretty logical, and I don't think anyone could really argue with that claim. Even when low-wage workers rally together and form unions, I think they still end up being underpaid and mistreated for the most part. In the end, capitalism comes down to a hierarchy of power, and the fact that Americans who have power do not want to share their power with the people that are below them on the hierarchy, I think is what leads to a lot of the problems with America's capitalism system. Everyone simply craves to climb up the wealth ladder, and to do so usually entails showing minimal compassion for those below you in the hierarchy. And that's kind of my concluding point there. Thanks for listening.